Hey guys, it's Monday here on Zebra to Zebra. This week we are going to be talking about the three rarest forms of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. We're grouping them all together as one this week just because they're so much more rare than the other types that the information that we're giving out is less applicable to the population. But that doesn't mean that it's less important, and so we're going to try and do it a justice even though we are splitting up a week among three types. For this week, I'm only going to talk about Kyphoscoliosis type EDS, and the other members will talk about the other forms. That way we're not repeating the same information. Basically, to just get started right into this, Kyphoscoliosis type EDS is pretty similar to the other forms of EDS. The major diagnostic criteria is widespread joint hypermobility, which is the major diagnostic criteria for all forms of EDS. In individuals with Kyphoscoliosis type EDS, they are usually actually born with a lot of pretty obvious manifestations, so this type tends to get diagnosed earlier as opposed to some of the other types where people don't get diagnosed until some people are middle-aged or some people never get diagnosed. But this type of EDS usually gets diagnosed pretty early, and that is because individuals with Kyphoscoliosis type EDS are born with a severe scoliosis and kyphosis. Basically, they're born with spine deformity, and it's progressive, so it generally gets worse over time and usually needs to be surgically corrected. And sometimes it can get so severe to the point where it's compressing your lungs and your breathing capabilities, and that can be dangerous. Other manifestations from birth are muscle hypotonia, so babies might be delayed in their gross motor development because of the muscle weakness, and some babies with this form of EDS are also born with clubfoot. So those are some of the at birth manifestations. The other manifestations are the widespread joint hypermobility, joint dislocations, hyperflexibility, pain, all of the things that go along with just EDS in general go along with this type of EDS. Kyphoscoliosis type EDS also has some of the skin involvement that classical has. So there's hyperextensibility, there's fragility, specifically fragility, very thin skin. It can tear easily, bruise easily. You have thin scars that widen over time, and there can be a translucent effect on the skin, but that's not always. Other problems with Kyphoscoliosis type EDS that are just different are specifically the eye problems. It's the only form of EDS that's specifically known to have a lot of eye problems, and some of those include sclera fragility and possible rupture of the globe of your eye. And there's other problems that go along with it as well. So people with this type of EDS need to be monitored carefully for development of eye problems, because some of those can be significant and possibly lead to blindness. Along with that, this type of EDS also tends to come along with an increased risk for fragility of the arteries, the large arteries, and possibility for arterial rupture, which means that people with this form of EDS need to be monitored carefully for increases in blood pressure and sometimes need to take medication in order to keep their blood pressure down so as not to stress the arteries. That's basically the manifestations, the obvious ones. Of course, there's specifics, and everything's very connected with all of these forms of EDS. And there's a lot of other conditions that people with EDS tend to have, just because there's a lot involved that this can cause a lot of problems. But that's probably the major, this is Kyphoscoliosis EDS criteria. Basically, the management for this form of EDS is the same as the management for all of the other forms of EDS. You know, be careful when you're doing physical activity, probably stay out of gym, stay out of contact sports, don't stress your joints, don't allow them to dislocate. You know, if you have trouble walking, you know, don't walk excessively, don't run, don't put yourself in a place where you can get injured, as in if you're biking, if you fall off your bike, you could get injured. Also, people with this form of EDS might wear braces, which basically we all wear braces, braces on the joints to protect them, or like knee pads and elbow pads to protect the skin, because at those points, those pressure points where the skin gets pulled, there's more tearing in those areas. So that's to protect the skin from tearing and bruising. And so bracing, padding, avoidance of injury if possible. Also careful monitoring of blood pressure because of the increased risk for rupture of the large arteries. And then increased monitoring, a lot of monitoring for eye problems. Individuals with kyphoscoliosis type EDS also tend to have a similar stature to those who have Marfan syndrome, which would mean that they're taller, they have large hands compared to their face, and just like large arms compared to their height, and just thin and tall. That's basically the Marfan look. But to be tested for this form of EDS, the Beighton score in general can decipher whether or not a person has EDS, but to test specifically for this form of EDS, an individual can actually test it through a urine test, because this type of EDS is caused by an enzyme deficiency. So that's a pretty easy test to get, and they've isolated the gene, so it works out pretty well to get tested for it, and then once you know you have it or don't have it, you can treat your problems accordingly. Unlike the other forms of EDS, kyphoscoliosis type EDS is not dominant. Hypermobility type, classical type, those are dominant genetic diseases. So if my mom has EDS, I would have a 50% chance of being born with EDS. I have EDS. I have classical type EDS, which is dominant, which means if I marry somebody who does not have EDS and we produce a child, that child has a 50% chance of having EDS. But kyphoscoliosis type EDS is not dominant. It's a recessive disorder, which means there's a less chance that the child will be born with it. So if I had kyphoscoliosis type EDS and I got married to a guy and we had a kid, and the guy was unaffected by EDS and did not have, was not a carrier for it either, that would mean that he has 2 alleles that are normal, and if I have kyphoscoliosis EDS, I have 2 alleles that are affected. And if we were to have a child, our child would have a 25% chance of being born with kyphoscoliosis EDS, as opposed to 50% if it was dominant. My child would have a 50% chance, however, of being a carrier, which means my child could still pass on this form of EDS without actually being affected by it. So, kyphoscoliosis EDS. You were born with possibly club foot, definitely scoliosis and kyphosis, muscle weakness, hypotonia. As you age, you have the joint problems, the dislocations, the arthritis, the pain, the blah 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 EDS stuff, just general EDS stuff, along with eye problems, skin problems, and large artery fragility. That's basically kyphoscoliosis EDS in a nutshell. It's also recessive, which means if I were to have a child, my child would have a 25% chance of being born with it, a 25% chance of being born without it and ending the line, not having a gene for it, not passing it on ever, and a 50% chance of not having it, but having one of the genes for it, and so still possibly passing it on to his or her children in the future. I think that's it in a nutshell. If that was all over the place, if it was repetitive, if it was too much information spat at you at once, let me know. I can post some information about it on my Tumblr, which the links for that will be below, so come check it out. I'd love to talk to you guys over there, get some questions so I can answer more of them. The rest of the week we'll be talking about arthrochalasia type EDS as well as dermatosparaxis. And that is it. Come chat with me on my blog, send me questions because next week's a Q&A week, and that's all for now. I hope you guys are all doing well. I hope you guys are maintaining your joints in their sockets where they belong, and I hope you guys are feeling okay. At least over here, I've had one of the longest winters ever of my life. It's been winter all through April. It's now May, and it is finally spring. So I'm loving that. All through April, it was 40 degrees, 30 degrees, raining and cold. It was miserable. Sorry, that's a train, because there's a train right by my house. But it's finally May. It's finally warm. I can go outside. My joints feel better. And that's it. So I hope you guys are doing well too. Definitely come talk to me. Some of your questions, you can put them here, down below there, or you can click the link that's down below there and come check out my blog. And yep, so that's it. I said that's it like 8 times, but this really is it. Like, share, subscribe, give me thumbs up, check out the videos, check out the other people's videos, talk to us all. We all want to help. We all want to hear from you. We love you all. We hope you're doing well. I spit everything at you. I'm still talking, and goodbye.